So welcome, everybody. My name is Martine Carkison. I'm a communication studies professor here at Colorado State University and the founder and director of the Center for Public Deliberation, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The last 3 years, I've been doing a lot of work in the intersection between the work that I do in deliberation and civic engagement and engaging communities and collaborative problem solving with the journalism world, which has brought me to meet these fine people that I'll be what we kind of talking through today. We have one other panelist that's on I-25 that should be here kind of briefly, so he'll be joining us today. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to let them introduce themselves and their organizations and their backgrounds. They all have very rich backgrounds that connect in lots of different ways on this issue, this connection between journalism and democracy. So the first round, just be introductions, getting a sense of your organizations. I do have a resource page that will be passed around that has their bios and the links to the organizations, links to key reports. I also kind of created some of my favorite kind of resources in this area. When I get a chance, I'll also post that on the chat for those on website or when I stop talking on the Zoom. We'll be able to add to that too. That document, obviously there's a lot of links, which are hard to get to work in paper, but on the back, there's a QR code. Right. So you can kind of pull it up on your phone, email it to yourself. And I think I'm going to keep on working on that. So keep on adding it. One of the questions I hope to ask before the end is, hey, what's your favorite book or thing to read about this area? And if it's not on there, we'll add that to that. So hopefully we can kind of create a resource for people to dig in. The more people reading about this connection, the better, I think, because we need democracy and journalism needs a lot of help. Right. So the more people that are engaged and educated about this, the better. Right. So we'll do a round of introductions. The overall title of this is, the Democracy and Local Journalism Challenges and Emerging Opportunities. Lots of challenges. I'm going to ask that question. What are the biggest challenges to you to kind of get that out there? But a big part of this session today is kind of a celebration, particularly for Colorado, at least as I've been doing it. Colorado is a hotbed of innovation in this work. A lot of people on this panel are part of that. We're doing a lot of interesting things, thinking about democracy and journalism and rethinking and reimagining local journalism that you'll hear about today, right? So hopefully most of this panel is, here's some really cool things that are happening that we want people to know about, that we want people to support, and that need a lot of support to kind of pull off. But several different projects, some of them I'm a part of, all of them I'm a fan of, right, that you'll hear about, and you'll get a chance to kind of participate in some of these things that we're doing that is really making Colorado stand out nationally. There was an article, I'll probably pull it up at some point. Is Colorado basically the model for political communication right now with some of the projects that we'll hear about, and Tina will tell us about that a little bit, right? But with that, we'll go down the row here, right? Again, and spend a little time here. So give us a little bit of your background, tell us a bit about, I think you all have a couple organizations you're connected to in different ways, just to kind of situate our day. So.
Sure, great. Thanks, Martine, and thanks for inviting us all here. Such a good and rich topic, and I'm excited to explore it with you all. My name's Melissa Milios Davis. I work for Gates Family Foundation. We're a place-based foundation based out of Denver, and we do grant making and impact investing all over the state. We are not affiliated with Bill and Melinda. We are a local family, and all of our work is place-based. So, and I also am the director of the Colorado Media Project, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I come at this work really from a couple of different angles. I was a journalist by profession. I was a reporter and producer in digital newspapers and a bit in public radio for over a decade. Before moving into some government communications and then nonprofits. All that background brought me to the Gates Family Foundation. And then in 2018, I'd been out of the journalism world for a little while. And then in 2018, while I was working at Gates, we had what I call a catalytic event here in the state. We'd had one before, I think, with the closure of the Rocky, but it really brought, this issue of the future of journalism and its impact on democracy to the forefront of people outside of the journalism field, because I know folks from inside the journalism field have been kind of aware of the changes for a long time, but it really, even for someone like myself that it used to be my own profession, I had kind of tuned out, I didn't really pay attention to what was going on in the profession itself. And when the Denver Post editorial board kind of rose up and said, hey, the community deserves better than this, shell of a institution, really important civic institution in our state. We really took notice. My boss was worked for mayoral administrations and did many big community development works and building works over the course of his career, and really civically minded and really took that seriously. And so we actually did, people started at that moment talking about which billionaire should take over the Post or should buy the Post, and that'll solve our problems. And we started thinking, like I said, Gates really thinks about things from a statewide perspective. And we really realized pretty quickly that we needed to get smarter about what was going on and what were the real solutions and what were the real paths forward for this industry that has been commercially supported for so long, and what is on the horizon. So we actually did a grant in 2018 to the Colorado Media Project, and now I'm the director of that. And I'm going to pause.
Slides or?
No, I was
Okay,
going to say
yeah.
I'll pause there and we can kind of go a little deeper. But I became the director of the Colorado Media Project, which is it started as a project at University of Denver to kind of get ourselves and the community of it do some research, surveys, and things like that about the status of the industry. And now it's a philanthropic initiative based at Rose Community Foundation, where we're pooling funds from local and national foundations to catalyze continued innovation in the ecosystem, and to be an advocate and a funder of the field. So.
Hi, I'm Jenny Fisher. I'm an instructor here at CSU in the journalism department. And my background is varied. My first degree was in graphic design, but then my first job was at the Fort Collins, Colorado. And so I kind of had this osmosis of an introduction to journalism. And then I wound up being an advisor at Rocky Mountain Student Media just across the plaza for many, many years. And saw a lot of change in that arena during that span of time. We saw journalism go very digital, and then, the advent of social media, all these changes. And one of my favorite parts of that job was seeing the industry evolve through the eyes of the students and seeing what they came up with, what they did. They had this kind of let's throw it on the wall and see if it'll stick approach, which was kind of wonderful to see. And with that inspiration, I got my master's degree in journalism innovation, which kind of brought me back here in a roundabout way. And so now I work with Martina as co-director of the Deliberative Journalism Project, which we'll get into that later. And my role is largely working with students on, again, innovating and telling good stories. And we'll dip into that a little bit.
How many people knew that you can get an MA in journalism innovation? I thought that was pretty cool. That was
It was so fun.
We're putting that degree to use, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. It all worked out. Yeah.
A lot of foreshadowing here. Really good things, everybody. I'm Laura Frank. I'm the executive director of CoLab, which is what we call the Colorado News Collaborative. And it's a 501c3 nonprofit that works with, last year we interacted with 183 news organizations around Colorado. When I say that, people always say, there are 183 news organizations. There are actually more. So there's room for growth. And they're organizations of all stripes. So urban, rural, suburban, for-profit, nonprofit, public media, ethnic media. It's a great kind of experience to have everyone coming together in a way that we can find collaboration and work together. And we focus on 3 different things. We shorthanded as reporting, reach, and revenue. So you may have heard about collaborative reporting projects around the country. There are more than 300 of them. Most of them focus purely on collaborative journalism, working together on collaborative reporting. CoLab is a bit different from that. We do have some really robust collaborative reporting that forms the base, the foundation of our work together and builds the trust and the kind of relationships that is needed to have an ecosystem like we have here in Colorado. You know, what Martine is talking about being, you know, kind of a guide for other places. But we also look at reach and revenue. Reach is how are news organizations engaging with their communities. You could have great content and it would be trees falling in a forest if people are not engaged in getting something. I see all your heads shaking up and down. Just for the people on the video, they're shaking up and down.
They can see it. They got the panoramic.
Oh, okay, I didn't know. All right, there. Great, so anyway, the reach is interacting with community, helping community feel part of the public. So Melissa does a great job of talking about how journalism is a public asset, is a public good. It's something for the public, with the public, not just about the public. So we try to incorporate that into the work. And then we weave in revenue, because you can't have successful reach or reporting if you don't have the revenue. And that all those things we are working and still working, experimenting. The lab and CoLab is a real thing, experimenting on how to integrate those things so that local news organizations, the news organizations that serve the communities you live in, can find ways to strengthen all three at once. So it's exciting work. My background, I think I've neglected.
Yeah, I was gonna mention INN.
Sorry. So my background, I started out the first half of my career, I was an investigative reporter. This will date me. I was what they used to call a computer assisted reporter. Doesn't that sound like telephone assistant? I mean, of course you use a computer. It was new then, but it's basically using social science analysis. So, you know, those analyzing big data sets and using those as the basis of reporting. That was kind of my specialty. I've worked in a little bit of radio. I spent about 7 years at public media. I have started a nonprofit investigative news organization, Tina Griego, who you'll meet in a minute, and I worked at the Rocky Mountain News when it closed. And so we've kind of seen that development of what happens when a new technology like the internet enters and people's behaviors change and big giants fall like the Rocky, but then new things are springing up from that like a phoenix. So you mentioned the INN. INN is the Institute for Nonprofit News. It's an organization not unlike CoLab. CoLab is kind of a state level INN of sorts. I helped found INN in 2009, the summer after the Rocky Mountain News closed. And there were a little over a dozen of us who started this organization thinking that working together, we would learn faster and be able to do more. INN is now more than 400 news organizations all across the country, all nonprofit news organizations. Yeah, it's been amazing. And INN also started out doing just collaborative journalism in the early days, and we quickly realized that it needed to be more than that. It needed to help undergird the health of the news organizations that are there and working together. So it's been a big learning curve. It's been an experiment. It's been an adventure. And how many of you in here are students right now? Okay, so when you're my age, you always want to give some advice, right? So you can take this, maybe worth what you just paid for it, nothing. But years ago, I can remember being in a newsroom where they said, this internet thing, I don't know if it's going to stick around, but if it is, we're going to wait until we figure out how to make money on it. Okay. Now you are at the cusp of a revolution that AI is going to, it will not only be for journalism, but it'll be for everything. So if you're a student right now, understand how AI works and how you can use it to enhance, leverage, facilitate the things that you want to do. That's my, that's what I have to offer.
We'll hear from Tina later, but you want to just at least quickly introduce yourself? Just and we'll hear more about the project a little later.
I'm Tina Griego. I am a long time journalist. I work as a managing editor of the Colorado News Collaborative. So over time, I've participated in these big collaborative projects where we're bringing together multiple newsrooms to work on stories that have impact across the state and in managing those projects. And I have the true pleasure and privilege of talking to news editors and reporters across the state. And it is a constant reminder to me about not just that they work their butts off, because they're working really hard, but just how committed they are to this endeavor, to the endeavor of giving communities the information that they need so they can make informed decisions. And it's really inspiring. And I just sometimes feel like people, I mean, I'm lucky because I get to see it, I get to have these conversations and you guys don't. And so trust, like they get it and they're working hard. And then, you know, this whole crew, these powerful women right here, they're just, you know, really engaged. And Martine,
He, him, pronouns.
really, like, there's a lot of people engaged in this problem, in this challenge, and I'm really happy to see you here today. It's very encouraging. So that's me.
All right, so I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more and more of the background. I'm going to try to do this pretty quick. The big picture stuff. If this stuff is interesting, across the hall, the CPD, the Center of Public Deliberation that I run is running an open house. I have a lot of my articles and so forth. We do have a resource table here with a lot of the resources on your page. If you want to look through them, if there's multiple copies, you can take whatever's there. If there's the last copy, leave it, but you'll have the link to it. So I'm a communication studies professor. About the last 20 years, I have focused on how do we have tough conversations about the issues that we care about. My initial academic training was in argumentation, which is like, how do you understand how people make arguments and how do you make distinctions between a strong argument and a weak argument? I used to focus on national politics and got more and more frustrated, primarily because bad arguments tend to work and good arguments tend to fail. And that was pretty frustrating. So when I got the job at CSU now 20 years ago, I shifted from national to local, and I shifted from being a critic, like talking about how other people talk, to being much more of a practitioner. So what I do with the CPD, it serves as an impartial resource for the Northern Colorado community. I actually train students in my classes. Any students here that are interested, talk to me. We're recruiting right now. Allie, who is actually the current editor of the Collegian, is one of my CPD student associates this semester. So you can talk to her as well. And then we design and run meetings for the community. So it's designed this concept that democracy is hard. Democracy requires really high quality communication and discussion, particularly across difference. And unfortunately, we're just not wired for that. A lot of my work is informed by social psychology and brain science. And the reality is we're much more wired for outrage and polarization than we are for collaboration and deliberation. But once we know that, we can change things. So a lot of my work is how do we design processes to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and actually tap into the best so we can have the conversations we need to have. So I've been running the CPD for 18 years. We've run over 500 meetings, mostly face-to-face, real people talking to each other about real issues. We run now, we get hired now by the city, by the county, by the school district to run these meetings, right? So that's what I've been doing for 18 years. Starting about 3 years ago, and part of this was when the Coloradans dropped their opinion page, right? And it felt like a loss to the community in some sense. It is this community resource. My work was shifting from focusing on individual events, like running meetings, to more like a systemic approach, like how is my community talking and what are the resources that elevate the conversation and what are those that bring it down and how can I intervene in that system to improve things, right? And having a strong local journalism was clearly something really important to what I would call a deliberative system for that to function. So I started kind of exploring that more and more. I got connected to the American Press Institute, had great conversations with people like Paula Ellis, one of the books that we have there through the Kettering Foundation, and started thinking more and more about what have we learned in running 500 meetings of bringing people together across difference to have better conversations? How might that translate to journalism, right? And then more broadly, how do we think about the capacity of our communities to have these kind of conversations? And a lot of that is, honoring the public voice, but also recognizing the importance of expertise and negotiating that tension kind of between those, which is something journalists always do as well, right? So there's so many parallels between my work and I spend a lot of time making sense of all the opinion and all the noise, and then reframing it and then creating a discussion guide that's designed to help people have conversations and then training people to do that, right? So now we're working, one of the projects we'll talk about is, I'll be working with newsrooms across the state, figuring out which of these skills that we have translate. Some of that in terms of what we're calling deliberative journalism. So journalism that has a specific focus on helping people have better conversations and make decisions together. But then also is for newsrooms to do what I've been doing, right? For newsrooms to host more meetings and to be a convener and to be a big part of my research is our communities need conveners. They need bridging institutions. They need organizations that are focused on helping bring people together. And a big part of that, and I've got an article over there on this, about this dual challenges, democracy and journalism. I came to journalism because I'm trying to help communities, and good deliberative journalism is a solution to that. At the same time, journalism is somewhat in crisis, right? So I'm hoping, hey, maybe this works together, that reimagining local journalism and filling this need might be an important shift here. And one of the first things I read of yours, of the Colorado Media Project, was that public good piece. We have a copy there, it's on your link, right? But that notion of seeing journalism as a public good is kind of part of this, right? So that's where I'm coming from. So we started this deliberative journalism project about 3 years ago or so. So Jenny now has a dedicated class. I have a dedicated class training student facilitators. We now have a dedicated class at CSU training deliberative journalists. So she'll talk a little bit more about that. We're still playing with this concept. I will say this isn't completely new. Journalism has always been somewhat deliberative. But we're doing a subset of journalism that's particularly kind of focused and experimental on what does it mean to really kind of play that facilitator role and to talk about issues in a different way. You're designing your journalism in a way to spark better conversations and help us kind of move forward, right? So with that, I'm going to pull up real quick. You actually have it on your handout, but I'll pull up in a second our working definition of deliberative journalism. A lot of things I just talked about kind of gets baked into there, right? So the argumentation and the deliberation and the conflict management and the social psychology and traditional journalism. Paula Ellis's book in particular does a really good job of, here's some of the traditional stuff of journalism we need to keep, and then here's some new stuff that we need to bring in, and how do we kind of mix this together, right? And then we've developed some materials that I'll kind of talk about, and then I'll pass it over to Jenny to, like, what is she doing with this class, sharing some of those resources and talking through these 7 key aspects. So I'll go ahead and pull up the definition. We can look at it real briefly. So first I want to share my screen so the people online can see it. Doing stuff's in the way. So this is the definition. I'll just kind of put it up again. You have it in the handout if you want to. We'll let people online kind of just read that, and then I can kind of switch it. So yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about what you do in class, and then I'll switch it to the 7 key tasks when you.
And yeah, and as Martine alluded, this is the definition today. Like we definitely kind of talk about this and tinker with it from time to time. But the thing about working on this project, and then we have Tim. You made it.
Oh, geez.
That's okay. So working on the deliberative journalism project has been wonderful for a number of reasons. At its core, when Martine, really got the ball rolling with the project, is this intense partnership between a handful of academic departments here at CSU, including the communications department, journalism, political science, and languages, and then also local professional media outlets, some nonprofits, and the library system. And all of those partnerships are intentional, and each partner has a very specific role. To get to the deliberative piece, one of the very first things that Martine did was actually convene meetings at the library here in Fort Collins, the Old Town Library. And we would talk about these, well, we still do, talk about these tough conversations. And we've talked about everything from, you know, what they are, literally what are those topics that people don't want to talk to like relatives about at Thanksgiving and things like that, you know, or how do we have them? How do you ask a good question? How do you become a better listener? And so the variety of topics in those in-person meetings has been varied, and the conversations have been really interesting. The last one was about AI, and to your point, and it was very interesting, and people range from, you know, being kind of blasé, like maybe it'll go away, to being literally terrified. And there's, you know, every shade of gray in between, and you see that with each conversation, and so that's been amazing. We also, through the partnership with the Coloradoan, had, you know, the Coloradoan Conversations, which unfortunately now is gone, but we're trying to figure out how to replace it. But it essentially was the online version of that, where my students pick up on the deliberative piece is kind of taking those ideas and trying to integrate them with their own journalism. There's right now this semester, they're taking some really interesting approaches. And we're nearing the end, so they're all kind of freaking out and just focusing on publishing the damn thing. But you know, they'll get there, and I keep telling them that. But they really focus on the conversational aspect. You know, they're curious. The students that I've had are very curious, and they're journalists at heart, and they really take to heart bringing in those conversations, showing different perspectives through storytelling of every single way. Some has come in the form of podcasts. There have been a handful of documentaries that have come out of the class, a whole bunch of printed pieces. One student of mine did a story about the land use code. He had no idea what he was getting into when he made that decision. But he did just kind of like a weekly update. And each week he would publish, you know, just a conversation with a student who was nervous about their rents going up or being able to find a place in the first place. He talked with contractors and real estate agents and other various experts. And he also worked really hard to pull apart different pieces of the code that were in the news at that moment. And so this is an example of the kind of experimentation and the kind of thoughtfulness that's going into their stories, and where I hope they take them is to other newsrooms and other experiences, and you know, kind of one of those tell your friends type things, you know, where they bring that energy with them into the book.
Good. Well, we do have a new member of the panel, right? So we kind of gone through and introduced ourselves and our organizations, kind of so forth. So if you want to kind of go ahead and do that now.
Sure,
Yeah.
apologies again. I'm Tim Regan Porter. I'm the head of the Colorado Press Association. That is the trade group for print and digital news outlets, and even some broadcasters now, even though we don't do anything with the broadcast component of what they do. So we represent over 140 newsrooms throughout the state, pretty much every community of any size, and some of the smallest towns in the state have a member. And our job is multifaceted. One is we represent their interest at the state capitol and sometimes beyond, with lobbying and working on transparency bills, and sometimes bills that will impact them in terms of hiring and various economic impacts. And so we're their voice there. Two, we sell ads for newspapers, particularly to statewide and national brands who don't want to deal with 150, 170 different outlets. They can come to us and we will take care of it for them. And newspapers, we send a fair amount of money into newsrooms throughout the state. And then three, we do education and training. We do an annual convention. Networking is one of the big things our members say they get out of us. And we work closely with CoLab on a lot of the educational and various services. So that's the press association.
So I think we'll go, I'm gonna pop this up just for those online. We have a handout. I don't know if I have it there. I might have it in the other room, but I'll grab it at the very end. But these are the 7 key tasks. We're not gonna walk through them now because I think time wise, but this is for the Deliberative Journalism Project. We laid these out as like, okay, these are the things we're working on. The really quick version of this is some of this journalists already do a lot. And then some of this is kind of some of the more newer stuff of deliberative journalism kind of coming in. But I was gonna kind of lay that out there. But we want to shift to kind of our first specific question, which I'm trying to find that right balance between kind of the realism and optimism. I'm generally an optimistic guy, again, and as I said, a lot of really innovative, exciting things going on in Colorado, kind of in this area. But I also want to ground us first in some of the challenges that we're dealing with, right? So this might not be everyone's answering this question, right? But particularly from the journalism side, but then if you connect it to the impact on democracy, where are we right now? What's the challenge we're facing or y'all are facing, I guess, in the world of journalism? So I don't know who wants to start us off with that.
I think it's fair to say.
I'm happy to start. This is something I deal with every day. Just kind of situated in the bigger picture. I mean, we've been in a serious transition period for really under 20 years. We should have been in a transition period for 30 plus years since the web browser was invented. But less than 20 years ago was peak newspaper profit. There was a lot of consolidation. 2006, I think, was the peak of revenue. And we were, I don't mean this to sound overly harsh, but a little fat and lazy. But that's what happens with big industries who have near monopolies. And if you think pre-internet days, we were the source of information for almost every community in the country and beyond. You had TV news, which only had, short segments, so you could only get so much there, and then it was gone. Newspapers were something that stuck around and you could hold. And maybe a little bit of radio news, but most of them didn't do a lot. So it was pretty much newspapers. We had that monopoly, and with monopoly comes outside profits. And if we employed the largest number of journalists, that is no longer true. It didn't change until about 10 years ago, I think, when online outlets started overtaking newspapers. A lot of people get their news from TV. Majority of people, but they are also under-resourced in terms of journalists. In fact, the knock on TV journalists, excuse me for saying this, but would be they would pick up the daily newspaper to find their stories. Now, there was a lot of great TV journalists throughout the history, and I think they've stepped up really.
I never was a TV.
Okay.
Okay.
I know you worked for Rocky Mountain PBS, I
Yeah.
wasn't sure. You actually did TV.
Yeah, well, it's documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, go on. But it was true.
So you probably heard some of the stats about how many outlets have disappeared. So we've been in that constant flux. And I think it's going to start again with AI. And not just because people will get their information back, the economic models are going to change as search becomes not the primary driver of traffic for people. So all of this is just turmoil for the industry. At the same time, we have bigger audiences than we ever had because you find it online and on Facebook and Twitter and on the websites and all these different ways. So we still have huge readership, but it's not the same. And this is all in the context, tie it back to democracy, of lack of trust in institutions that dates back at least 20 years. I've seen some studies, and the academics can probably update me, but sometime around the launch of Fox News, not to get partisan, but sometime around then is when I think some of the polarization data shows that peak. But it's not just political polarization, churches, governments, schools, increasingly, sadly. We've lost faith in all institutions, including news media. And so as we're trying to figure out the economics of our business, we're also trying to help stave off declines in democracy. And those two go hand in hand, because as news as an institution, newsrooms have declined in perceived power, we're not able to influence what goes on in terms of just getting the information out there. I mean, we've seen politicians from president all the way down to, city council and dog catcher who just don't care if you expose something wrong about them. Not all of them, but increasingly we're seeing that because we don't have the power we used to have. And that's a real problem. for democracy, not because we don't have power, because people don't trust information and it just doesn't, and the politicians don't feel as if they are being held, have to be accountable. So that's sort of the background. Hope, I interview news leaders from around the country for a podcast I do. And one of the questions I ask almost every one of them at the end of the podcast is, are you filled with more hope or dread for the future of local news? And increasingly, I mean, almost universally, there's a lot of hope out there. And it's not because we have an economic model and we see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's because we see the work we're doing is more impactful. It is more representative. It is more inclusive. And we are, unlike 10, 15 years ago, there's a lot of experimentation. It's not just a handful of people. I think most people in industry, almost universally, see the need for new ways to do what we do. The fundamentals of journalism are the same, but how we do it, who we include, how we deliver it, all of that has to change.
So Melissa has some data and she kind of whispered to me like, you're talking through, so she was switching the slides, right? But I don't know if you want to touch on some of those points.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna ground us a little bit in a little bit of data, because that's what we do at the Media Project is, a lot of research around these things, but
And we have a couple of these reports that you look at.
to make the point, I mean, this is some data from a survey, a statewide survey we did with Corona Insights 2 years ago. And you can see this is probably the most complicated one, but what Tim just said about, this is like, what do people want local news organizations to do and how good a job do they think they're doing at it? Informing people about public affairs and state and local politics, that's really important and journalists are doing it well. And holding the powerful accountable is in the not doing so well. And I think that speaks to kind of what you just said. It's not that local journalists aren't trying, it's that like there's become a little bit of a chicken or the egg thing with that. But I wanted to go back to just a couple other pieces. Tim was talking about the, I think this is a really important thing for us to keep an eye on, because even though newspapers are declining in number and even the number of stories that they're producing on a weekly basis, they're still the lion's share of what we think of as local news. Like you might be getting it on your tablet or on in some other format digitally, but newspapers are the ones that are originating most of the stories still. That's for original local news. And then, why is this not clicking in?
No, you know what?
Do you have to aim it at the?
There.
Do I have to aim it at? I was
moving the Zoom.
There we go. Okay. Yeah. So, and then the original news was the previous one, but local, you can see that almost 60% is still coming from newspapers, with radio as the second. Wait, hold on. And then, to Tim's point too, just this is something that we've done this survey 3 times now since 2018, and this hasn't changed. If anything, it's gone up. That most people are accessing on a mobile phone. And I don't think most people, especially a lot of times people in the media, they're really still thinking in their first mode of publication. So if you work for a newspaper, you're still thinking print. If you work for radio, you're still primarily focused on getting it on the radio. But in reality, most people are still accessing their news and their information through digital means. And then, trust in local organizations is still much higher than trust in national news. And so I think sometimes you have to beware when you see those kind of really depressing statistics about that nobody trusts the media. And like when people say the media, when you ask them, about their local source, they have much higher trust and much better feelings about an emotional connection. And I think, some of the work that we're trying to do this year through things like the Voter Voices Initiative and another thing that Martina and I are working on called Above the Noise with Rocky Mountain Public Media. They're all kind of trust building exercises in addition to like doing the thing that they're doing. It's really trying to strengthen connections between local newsrooms, these, you know, scrappy local businesses that are in your community and your local journalists, and kind of trying to differentiate between national media and kind of the rhetoric that you're hearing there and polarization. And, you know, just again, this is a lot of data as well, but, you know, the point here was we really wanted to analyze, you know, who owns the media, you know, who controls what's in our media here in Colorado. And I think the good news, and this isn't the same in every state in the union, you know, that most of these are still small, independently owned small businesses, you know, and that's both a good and a challenging thing, right? Because a lot of them have been declining in revenue for the past 20 years. There's not been a lot of investment in digital infrastructure. And so they're very vulnerable. And so you continue to see newspapers just calling it quits, not finding someone to take the reins when publishers are ready to retire. And so, you know, those are some things that we're also kind of working on through the Colorado Media Project with partners. One thing that we've supported recently is the National Trust for Local News. Tim's predecessor worked on this, brought the Jerry and Ann Healy, the publishers of Colorado Community Media, were ready to retire, and they didn't want to sell to any big chains or hedge funds or things like that. So they're really looking for a better buyer. And so we kind of rallied some funding and support to help the National Trust for Local News, which is a national nonprofit that kind of buys up newspapers and then modernizes them and kind of keeps them in local hands. And so the largest family-owned chain became, you know, kind of salvaged, I guess, and is now being kind of reinvigorated and innovative. So, you know, those are the types of things that we're, you know, involved in.
I just switched over to Colorado.
Yeah. Oh, sure, yeah. And let's see. I think there might be one more. Oh, and then just the point on this one is just, you know, Laura mentioned the Institute for Nonprofit News, and you know, one of the things to understand about the field is just that something that used to be commercially supported is increasingly looking more and more like the public media model. The nonprofit media model is it is probably the most sustainable. It's really this kind of shift from having 90 to 100% of the revenue pie be dependent on advertisements, which is really hard for local businesses to compete with Facebook and Google, which currently have about 70 to 80% of the local ad revenue goes to those two, and plus Amazon, I think, is third. And so with that kind of being peeled away, again, with like cars.com and, you know, Craigslist, yeah, Craigslist, you know, reader revenue and membership is really increasingly important. And so I'm optimistic because what that does, it really changes the dynamic. And it actually, in my opinion, because as someone who's been a journalist back in the day, it really flips the incentive structure, right? Instead of trying to just go for eyeballs and add things that are valuable to advertisers, you're really, your first responsibility is your readers. And to me, that puts what has always been a mission-aligned profession. If you're a journalist and you weren't on the sales side, you were always mission-driven, right? But this puts the entire business kind of in the right frame of mind to be public service. And that's why, you know, our motto is local news is a public good. So.
So I want to be mindful of time, right? So I don't know if you have a quick, anything to add on the challenges, or So I
Great job.
first want to kind of shift to some of the opportunities and some of the projects that we've kind of briefly mentioned, but also hopefully have some time for kind of Q&A and kind of get into that well. So I don't know where we want to start there. We talked a little about delivered journalism kind of already, right? I know I want you to talk about the Voices program. We want to talk about the survey, and then we want to talk about above the noise, right? At least those three,
Sure.
but then others. So what are some of the most exciting things that y'all are working on right now that you want people to know about? Yeah, let's go with Gina. Yeah.
Go team.
All right. So I prescribe retention. It's like Vanna White. What's her name?
Vanna White.
Yeah. Okay, I hope that, before you leave today, you scan this code.
I have it up here too.
Excellent. So we're working on a project called Voter Voices.
Can you come a little closer to the phone so they can hear you? Probably, it might be a little too
I'm all
far.
right, yeah.
If you're loud.
Yeah.
So onion.
Okay, so we're working on a project, it's called Voter Voices, and essentially what it is an unprecedented effort to bring together Colorado newsrooms to basically, it begins with one question. These newsrooms are asking their communities one question: what do you want candidates to talk about as they compete for your vote? It is very much, while not explicitly citizens agenda, which is there, it is very much in the style of citizens agenda, which kind of flips the script, right? So instead of candidates determining what the agenda should be during the election cycle, it's really driven by what do voters say matters to them most. And so part of this effort, and this is really a start, the survey is a tool, is these newsrooms at a minimum are running QR codes, they're running surveys, they're beginning to from all over the state, rural Colorado, suburban, urban, and they are asking their community, basically, what do you want candidates to talk about? What matters to you most? And then those responses, this is the pledge that these newsrooms are making to their communities. Those responses are to then influence and shape coverage. So that newsrooms, again, this is a trust building exercise, right? We hear you. We are asking you, we are going to listen. We hear you. You're going to see that in our coverage. And then the ideal is that a newsroom would publish the agenda saying, this is what our community is telling us. And we are committed to coverage that includes these issues. We are committed to including your voices. We are committed to being responsive. And in that kind of next phase, if enough people respond, it's really about holding candidates' feet to the fire. That say, this is what candidates, this is what our community says matters to them. How are you going to respond? And we worked really hard to eliminate, implicit biases. We had rural newsrooms involved. We had people from community of color involved. And so far, we launched last Tuesday. So far, we have 2,130 responses. And a big chunk of them are concentrated in the Front Range. So one of the things I just really want to emphasize here is, okay, right now, Northern Colorado, which is represented by you all here, and the Coloradoan and KUNC, those are our kind of main outlets right now in Northern Colorado. They're coming in at they just have maybe a little bit more than 100 responses. And this is an opportunity, one, geographically, to try to make sure that we're bringing Northern Colorado into this conversation, because we will write statewide stories. But also, I really, really want young people to be represented here. I want young voters. I want to hear from young voters. We want to hear from young voters. And so if you can, please scan that code and then share the code. Share it with your fellow students, and let's try to get Northern Colorado on the board a little bit more, because I live in Fort Collins. And, but also let's really just do this outreach to young people, so that in the end, when Megan Burley and Megan works at Colorado Public Radio, they're our key partner in this. They have done a similar survey in the last couple of years, and their survey was kind of the foundation to our work. When we start analyzing this data, we can say, okay, it might not be a scientific survey, but it is going to be a representative survey. And so that's my pitch to you. That's one of our really big projects. It is drawing national attention because it's just unprecedented to have newsrooms across Colorado working together in this way to listen to their communities. So
When I Googled Voter Voices 2024 to kind of find the link for the handout, it's really cool. You got to do it because it's like Denver Post and Colorado Sun and
Yeah.
Parcom and this one and like every single one all the way down, right? Huh?
Do you want to pull up the map?
Yeah, where is it? But if I Google it, it gives me 5,000 links for different places. I don't know which
Oh,
one
I
to go
think, yeah,
to.
Laura sent
So
you this.
go to the collab.
Maybe
or-
you didn't see mine.
Oh, do collab,
Yeah,
do
you can
collab
go to-
news.co.
Yeah, okay.
Collabnews.co.
Collab news.
Do you want to share them?
And
Oh, wait.
NEWS, not
Yeah.
NUSC.
Voices report?
Yeah, let's pull this up and then, do that. Well, while they're doing that, Melissa is, cueing me to share something else. We did, a series of, working groups funded in part by CMP, and the idea was to bring together communities of color from all across the state to ask them a single question, which was, how could media better serve you? And we brought together Black voices, Latino voices, Native American, Indigenous voices, and then the fourth group was Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. So 4 groups. And interestingly, in those separate working groups, they all landed on one recommendation that was similar across the board, and that was, we want to be able to connect with the media who are serving our communities. And so we created something that will show you after this, called Amplify Colorado. And it is an online, you can Google it too. It's an online resource that pulls in bios and contact information for people from across the state, from those communities of color and other marginalized communities, rural, et cetera. And also invites people from news organizations, news professionals, to share their contact information so that people can find each other and connect. So we'll take a look at that. But this is the map we were talking about. Maybe you can make it smaller so we can see the whole thing.
We tried.
Oh, you did. Okay, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. And it probably needs updating already because people keep, newsrooms keep asking to be part of it, but you can see, there you go. You can see that it's news organizations. Go ahead. Kim.
No, I mean, so this is really cool. I will say that when we started putting this together, in some ways, so I did outreach to these newsrooms and then it wasn't like newsrooms really do want to participate in this. And when we put it on the map, it was a little overwhelming in a way. The project in some ways is like, it's just, it has its own momentum. And so looking at it geographically too, one of the things is we are looking at the data all the time, so we can see where we're gonna have to fill in holes, but you can see where our news deserts are. So they see that strip all along the kind of bottom and then on the east. So that's telling me I gotta get Kiowa on board. I gotta get, well, there's nobody down there. It's really kind of a news desert down there. But yeah, those are the participating newsrooms. There are a couple more that are not on there yet. And I want I'm gonna segue to you if that's okay. Sure. One of the things that, one of the things that this is all about is really about how do we talk and listen to and act upon what our communities are telling us? And so this project very much intersects with the work of Above the Noise. And so, because that is about, again, this is a tool, it is a beginning and a start, but what's happening with Above the Noise and how community engagement can further deepen this is really important, another of the important projects. So I'm gonna turn it to Melissa, because she's gonna talk about that.
And actually, before I jump into that, that's a great, maybe I should segue, but I wanted to go back to Voices project. So that is something that, you know, was really important, to the media project and listening in terms of our listening, right? Because we are, you know, a fund, you know, like, and we have kind of gone out and, you know, rattled the cages to get some money into a common fund where we can have, open access grants, to newsrooms across the state. And so one of the things, that we were so glad about I keep saying the voter voices, too many voices, the Voices initiative, that we, supported and worked on with CoLab, was just that they came up with the working groups came up with some really important recommendations, and they're accessible from both of our websites, CoLab and CMP. What was that organ? But we have, over the past 3 years, we've given out over almost $1 million in grants, to about more than probably 40 different projects, across the state. The Amplify database is one, but there's a lot of, really important work that's going on in smaller ways, you know, in small.
Well, and big ways.
And big ways, but also in small, that, you know, newsrooms, like I said, one of the things we know is that they're starved for resources, but they're creative and they're interested in this work. And so, you know, small grants, can really help, keep them going, you know, and give some excitement, I think, to a lot of newsrooms. So that's something we're really happy to be able to do. Thank you for tossing it over with the above the noise. So, you know, this was like a thing that we've, been hoping to do for a really long time, is just support more, community-based conversations where newsrooms can really, set the table and, you know, introduce themselves or reintroduce themselves or continue. I think public media has been doing this for a long time, but, you know, a lot of, great conversations can be hosted by newsrooms, like in the deliberative style. There's also, newsrooms are thinking about doing listening events, documentary screenings, about important topics. But the idea is just really, you know, especially after COVID, and we've been so isolated, and just, right after this, if you have occasion to stay and go watch the documentary Join or Die with Martina and I, we did a joint op-ed for the Colorado Sun, a couple of weeks ago, about, preloading Above the Noise, talking about this idea of, you know, just social isolation, polarization, disengagement from our communities. And really what's needed is, you know, some more of that in-person, face-to-face connection and listening to each other above difference. And so that's what this is about. Rocky Mountain Public Media is, kind of the lead implementation partner, along with CSU and the Center for Public Deliberation. And they're providing, on-the-ground support to host, community events all over the state. So you'll hopefully begin starting to see that, in this, you know, late spring, all throughout the year and beyond, because we know that all this stuff doesn't stop when the election stops. In fact, we think there's probably even more need for healing and, you know, what comes next, no matter what happens, in this particular election cycle. So, you know, just those person-to-person events and connections, is really what is a complementary initiative to, the voter voices. And so it's really a great initiative that we're excited to be working on together.
How many newsrooms did you say? Is it
I
40?
think about almost 40
Yeah.
as well, and a lot of overlap too,
Yep.
between, the voter voices and I mean, we did, some polling at the end of last year, just asking what newsrooms wanted help with and the things that they had on their plates for this year. And of course, election coverage, and they really wanted to engage with communities in new and different ways and reach new audiences, younger audiences, and also, really an urge to talk with Spanish-speaking audiences, as such a big population in the state, and other, underrepresented communities and rural communities. A lot of our front range newsrooms really wanted to make sure that they were reflecting, rural voices and some things, some voices that they don't always hear from.
So I pulled out, this is the editorial that Melissa and I kind of wrote, talking about kind of the beginning of this project, about the noise. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, you know, at least my part in there of, you know, communities need these resources to bring us together, right? So we'll be experimenting a lot across all these newsrooms on how might that look, right? And yeah, I do want to save some time for questions. I don't know if there's I would like someone to tell the quick story about the printing press thing. That was a nice, cool collaborative thing that Colorado did as well.
Yeah.
That can be a quick story, right?
Yeah, I can start it and pass it to you for part of it, but, as I mentioned, Colorado Community Media is a close partner of all of ours. I mean, Colorado Community Media. And about 2 years ago,
Their publisher is a CSU journalism alum, right?
Yeah, that's right. And, we all knew that that there's a dearth of printing presses, not just here, but all across the country. Because there's just not as much of a demand, for printing, large scale commercial printing presses. And so we were down to kind of two major printing presses on the Front Range, the Denver Post and the Pueblo Chieftain. And, about, last summer, I guess last June, the Pueblo Chieftain announced that it was going to be closing its press, which, actually left almost 80, probably a little fewer, because I think there were other publishers on there, but community papers had no place to print. They had maybe like 2 months to find another printer. CoLab and CPA staff really worked really closely with a lot of those publishers and helped them navigate and find new places to publish. But we knew that long-term, there's not a lot of competition, the prices, just the costs of printing had gone up so much. And so in the background, the National Trust for Local News, which owns the 23 newspapers of Colorado Community Media, their economics had just completely flipped, and just bleeding money. So they had to figure out a way, to kind of take control of their own destiny, really. And so they came up with a business plan, basically, where they were going to buy a small community press, and not just provide those services to their own 23 papers, but also open that up for a mission-aligned, lower cost, hopefully, press that can serve the other publishers on the Front Range. So they are planning to open that, I think, by the end of this month, or maybe May. I think they're talking about being up and running in May, but we just had, if you can go to our website at oh, yeah, there it is. So there's a link to a webinar we just hosted a couple weeks ago where we announced this, and CMP, our role in it was we basically just brought funders together to quickly raise some money to be able to purchase the press. It was, I think, a win for not just CCM really, but hopefully smaller publishers on the Front Range. At least they'll have choice, which is, an important thing. A lot of them are publishing out of state right now. So.
Can someone give us like 30 seconds on Press Forward National?
That should probably be listened to.
Back to you, the funder person.
Sorry. Press Forward is, and I actually have a slide on that deck.
Okay.
Press Forward is a national initiative that's led by a coalition of national and local philanthropies. The big, hairy, audacious goal is to raise $1 billion in the next, raise and invest in local news $1 billion in the next 5 years. And they've already at the outset raised 500 million. And this is in new dollars too. We are all agreed that we weren't going to count money that we were already planning to put out there over the next 5 years, but it had to be like, our real goal is to go out and explain to our peers really in the foundation world and also in the public policy world and try and get, more dollars into the system. Because we're at a transformative time. I mean, this really is, an important next 5 years, the 5 years, next 5 years will really make a difference. And so we wanted to get money off the sidelines. And so, Colorado Media Project is the home of Press Forward Colorado. And we're going to just continue to do what we have been doing, which is, bringing together a funder coalition, who can, both create a pooled fund so that we can, none of us, this isn't like a major topic area for any of our foundations, but like, we can all put in a little bit, we'll have some funding for this really important field. So.
So we have questions from the audience that we want to dig into. I also want to give you the mic briefly to pitch your documentary. And we'll add his document. Well, can you give us 60 seconds on your document real quick, Don? No. And I'll add it to the resource page. So if you do the QR code, it'll be on there.
My name is Don Colasino, and I'm just finishing up a documentary. It'll be released probably at the end of this month. It's called Trusted Sources. And it's a documentary about how we deal with the decline of trust in news. And particularly the dearth of local news as local news starts to dry up. What we can all do as citizens and news consumers to try to keep these news outlets going. So the film will be out about the end of this month. There's a website that's there it is. And it's Trust Doc Film, doc as in documentary, trustdocfilm.com. And you can just keep an eye on that site and get updates when it comes out.
So we streamed it here with some of my students and some of our community partners and really enjoy the film. So looking forward to kind of the final product. Right?
Thanks.
Yeah, any questions? We got at least about 10 minutes here. There's not an event right afterwards, right? So I do want to honor people's time will end, but then we can kind of hang out in this room if people want to, but Rich.
What's the difference between the Voices Initiative and voter voices? And what is the Press Forward gonna do with 500 million or $1 billion?
Right.
I'll take.
You want to
the
answer the first one? Yeah.
Okay, so the difference between the Voices Initiative and voter voices, you can see the theme underlying all of it, but they are two
A lot
separate.
of voices in our heads.
There are a lot of voices in our heads, exactly. The Voices Initiative was really an attempt to try to bring together communities of color and media to understand how could media better serve those communities. And it, as Melissa described, was something that then sparked a whole lot of ideas to address those recommendations. And you could see them. I'm sorry, I should have done a slide with the recommendations on them, but you can see those recommendations. They're very similar among the 4 groups that I described for the kinds of things that people believe they need in order to build trust and relationship, which is really the key between community and newsrooms. So that was the Voter Voices initial start, and it's still going on with a number of projects that have grown out of that have been, many of them funded, most of them funded by Colorado Media Project. So
And that's 3, 4
Amplify.
years old or how?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
we-
started in
Yeah.
2020.
we, the Amplify Colorado, so if you Google Amplify Colorado, you can go and anybody in this room could submit, something to that or use it in order to find reporters or, experts or people with different lived experiences in your community. Is something that's open to everyone. No one gets on there without their permission. In other words, we don't put people on there. It's something that they raise their hand and ask to do. The Voter Voices is a new collaborative journalism project that Tina is leading from a group, a growing, I think we have more than 50 newsrooms now that are participating. And Tina just said before this meeting started, that we're going to have to stop taking more people on and move on to the next phase of what we're doing. But the centerpiece of that is a citizen-driven agenda, a citizens agenda that, that we're loosely following, that really asks voters, what is it you want to know? So they sound similar, but they are different. But what we have been finding in our 4 years of existence is that things tend to cross and integrate and build on each other. So we imagine, in fact, we just had a meeting yesterday with the Rocky Mountain PBS folks who are leading the Above the Noise project to have community conversations in person around the state, and shared how Amplify might be a tool, a very concrete thing that they could use, that local newsrooms could use as an outreach and connection tool for their communities. So it's open for anyone to participate in. So they merge at some point.
And you asked about what Press Forward is going to be prioritizing for, yeah. So
Or what's the BHAG?
well, so there's 4 priorities. One is to invest in newsrooms that are already strong and have great reach and connections with their communities. So one is just like direct investment in newsrooms to make them stronger. There's another priority for infrastructure that, stitches together the resources that newsrooms need. So things like shared services and just digital infrastructure and things like that. Public policy. I think anytime philanthropy has a big initiative like this, it's never the intent for philanthropy to always be the only contributors. And, currently, I'll just mention that in the state of Colorado is in the minority in putting $0 into public and nonprofit and any type of media. So that is something we'll be kind of looking at. And then the 4th thing is, equity. I think it's just acknowledging that even currently, most of the funding and philanthropic funding is going to white-led newsrooms, and we want to really invest in newsrooms that are led by and serving communities of color, but also other underserved communities. So for us, it's rural communities, other communities who might not have a newsroom of their own. So those are the 4 priorities. And any of the, a lot of the funding that is being counted, it's like the foundations are doing direct grants, but then there's also pooled funds. And those are the priorities of the pooled funds.
So I do think we're pretty much out of time. I'm gonna throw a couple quick things out there. One is I brought one of the dry erase boards. I think I've got some markers with me. But we just got one question out there. Hey, what's the most important thing you heard today you want others to know? I always like to ask that question at the end, just kind of see what kind of insight stuff through. Feel free to kind of visit the resources. One of the resources I have there that have multiple pages, you also have a link in your handout, is a reimagining local journalism discussion guide I created. So for that one was deliberating about journalism, right? So a lot of what we do with the CBD is we create these discussion guides that are specifically designed to kind of spark conversation. So we created about 2 years ago. AI is not in there, right? So we're going to have to update it kind of because that's going to change some of that world. But it talks about the different financial models. It talks about how do we create a demand for good journalism. It's one thing to, build up the resources to create good journalism. It's another thing for people to actually want it. And that goes into some of the social psychology and brain science that I'm dealing with, right? That's why facts don't work that much sometimes, because people might not want facts if the facts don't fit what they want to be true. So yeah, I'd love for y'all. That's an open, it's always a living document. You got a link in there to kind of provide feedback and ideas. So I'd love for any of y'all that are interested to kind of take that and look through it and give me some thoughts as we keep on refining that as a tool for communities to use to engage their community, to help them talk about, hey, what kind of journalism do we want and how do we make sure we get that, right? So with that, I want to thank our panelists for joining us, kind of coming down. And thank for the audience for giving us some of your time. And I hope this is a beginning conversation and, you know, we can hang around. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Round of applause for Josh
Yeah, there's,
and Jen.
oh,
These are two students at CSU who have really embraced this Voter Voices project. And Josh is coming up with super creative ideas to use social media to promote it. And Jen is our utility player, and we all know how much we need utility players. So I just want to
and if you don't know, the Robert Putnam Join or Die documentary who's mentioned is going to be at the Lyric here, I think at 5. Yeah. And Lyric does have a bar, so some of us are going to head over there for a little happy hour. I've got to clean up the room next door, the huge open house, so it'll take me a little bit to kind of get there. But hopefully we'll see some of you tonight. And then the Democracy Summit continues tomorrow. We have an expo with organizations in that room all morning long. Really interesting kind of training from Rosa Gonzalez. That's in the morning. That I think there's still some spots there. And then Robert Putnam is going to give the closing keynote from 1 to 2. So Robert Putnam is a political scientist that wrote Bowling Alone, that talks about the need to kind of be civically involved and you know, basically didn't come up with the concept, but really kind of grew the concept of social capital. So he'll be from 1 to 2 in this building tomorrow. Right? So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.